Okay, now we continue with chapter 5, the contaminants. In this lecture, we will talk about Savastivadin's fundamental view on all-time existence. And after that, we will talk a little bit about the causes for contaminants, for our defilements of its arising, the order and the cause. So, first of all, let's get to know one of the most fundamental, or we call it the core doctrine of Savastivada as a school, about the way of existence of factors. It means a lot, if not everything, or maybe it means everything to their theoretical system. And we do not need to agree, of course. We don't need to agree, but always good to understand and use it as a starting point for the progression of the views, for the progression of views, of deeper and deeper understanding of all dhammas. When we learn from Savastivada and then to Sautrantika, and then we can improve our views all the way up to Yogacara and then Madhyamaka. So it's always good to get to an understanding on Savastivadin's view first, on this all-time existence. If we use one sentence to present this teaching from Savastivada, and that is, all conditioned dhammas of the past, the future, and the present truly exist, though not eternal, not permanent. And they have scriptural and logical grounds to support, to back up this doctrine. The scriptural reference could be from this Samyukta Agama, which in that sutra it says, because past, future, and present form exist, the well-learned noble disciple does not cling to past form, does not delight in future form, and becomes disenchanted and dispassionate towards present form. Well, they take this one from the sutra, they say this is Buddha's teaching, therefore it is obvious that past, future, and present factors all exist as real entities. And they also have some logical reasoning. First, because we know that consciousness arises on two conditions. For instance, our eye consciousness, its arising depends on the eye faculty and the visible form. For example, when you see a color or when you see a shape. Likewise, the mind consciousness, the arising of our mind consciousness depends on the mental faculty and the Dhammadhatu. And the thing is, Dhammadhatu includes so many factors that actually spans the past, the present, and the future. It spans 3 times. So, the Savastivadin scholars argue that since the Dhammadhatu covers factors that spans 3 times, that's why our mind consciousness, we could also have consciousness that can occur in the past, in the present, and in the future. And that also explains that all factors can cover these conditioned factors. They can exist as real entities in the past, in the present, and in the future. Because if factors that belong to Dhammadhatu, they don't exist in the past, how can our consciousness apprehend them, and how can our mental faculty apprehend them to generate the mental consciousness? Therefore, it proves that the past factors must exist. And likewise, if a future factor that belongs to the Dhammadhatu does not exist, how can our mental faculty apprehend that factor and produce the consciousness. So that's their logical reasoning. And they have a second logical reasoning, and that is past karma produces future results. What they really mean is that if the past were non-consistent, if the past factors do not exist, then the act itself, the past action itself would be unreal. And if the act or the actions were unreal, then no result would arise. Since we now know that karmic results are experienced, we are experiencing our karmic results. So that proves that the past and future factors must truly exist. The past karma must exist as real entities. Otherwise, we cannot explain why we can experience these karmic effects. So that's these are the two logical reasonings from subdividing scholars to convince people that that all conditioned dhammas of the past, future, and present truly exist. We have more theoretical backup from the subdividing scholars. For instance, from Samgabhadra. In his commentary, he says, as I quote, he says, "We see in the world, people say actually past and future on factors that are real entities. We don't see people use these words on factors that are without real entities." So this is another theoretical backup for them. And Samgabhadra, he further argued that if we deny the real past causes or actions, and if we think that a real future effect is also does not exist, if we think this is wrong, if we deny the real existence of the past actions or future effects, then how can it be a false view if there are no real entities of the past actions and or future effects? How can this view become false? Because then such a deny would be totally okay. If they don't exist, then we can say they don't exist. The past causes or the future effects, it would be no problem to say that they don't exist. And then it will not be a false view, and then it is no big deal, and it should not cut off a person holding such a view, should not cut off their good roots. If we recall the part in chapter 4 about the cutting off and rearising of good roots, we say that the false view, the negation of cause and effect, would cut off one's good roots. So here Samgabhadra argued that if there is no real existence of past factors like past actions, or if there's no real existence of future factors like the future effects of the karmic actions, then it is totally okay to say that there's no cause and effect. Then it is not a false view, and it will not cut off good roots. However, we do know that this is false view, and it will cut off good roots. It proves that the previous causes and the future effects do exist as real entities. So that's his argument. Well, from what we see here, therefore, now we can understand Subhadivada, that according to them, all defilements as well of all defilements of the past, of the past, the present, or future, all those factors, including all defilements of 3 times, they are real entities, and since they are real entities, they must all be destroyed or abandoned in order to attain noble fruits, and ultimately an arhathood as a perfected being. So the reason they take these defilements so seriously, they must be destroyed, is also based on an understanding that they are, no matter past, present, or future, they are real. They have real entities, and they do exist. So they have to be destroyed. So we now understand them, their understanding of this. So that's their claim. We can take more. We can take a closer look because they have four most famous masters explaining their view on all-time existence. These four great Abhidhammikas, they are Dhammatata, Goshaka, Vashmitra, and Buddhadeva. We can start from Dhammatata. He claims a difference in mode of existence. All these are explanations to all-time existence. They just explain it from different perspectives. So Dhammatata said it's like melting and reshaping a gold vase. So the nature, like the gold color, or the real entity of a factor remains. Only the future, present, or past mode of that existence alters. That's his explanation of this all-time existence. And then Kushaka, he claims difference in characteristics. And he said, it's just like a man being attached to a particular woman and called so. People know that he is attached to that particular woman. It doesn't mean that it doesn't mean he's detached from other women, from other women. So likewise, Adama, we say, Adama is conjoined with the characteristics of future, present, and past at the same time, but they're not severed from that of the other two. So we say if a Dhamma is conjoined more with the characteristic of future, we cannot say that he has this Dhamma is severed or is detached from the other two. Just it's like an inclination or more inclined to conjoin with the characteristic of one of these three times. Well, that's Goshaka's theory. Well, but according to Vashmitra, he claims the difference in state. And he gave a metaphor about the counting block. So if you place a counting block, I'm not sure if you're familiar with that kind of counting device in China as well. We also use it, not very often nowadays because we have computer. But yes, that kind of counting block or counting device. If you place a block on the 1 square or on the 10 square or the 100 square, they mean differently. They mean 1 or 10 or 100. Then they would also be called so. So likewise, a dhamma through time do not really change in nature, but in a state of its activity. If a dhamma's activity has not yet been exercised, we say that's a future dhamma. If a dhamma is exercising its activity, we say this dhamma is in present time. And then when the dhamma's activity has ceased, stopped, it's gone, then we say that is a past dhamma. So this is a criteria. We say it is function-based criteria. So based if the dhamma's function is working or has worked or will be or will come. So that's it's based on function or you can call it activity. And the last master that explains this all-time existence theory by Subsidiavada is Buddhadeva. He claims from a perspective of the difference in temporal relativity. It's just like a woman who is both a daughter and a mother. If relative to her mother, we say this woman is a daughter, and relative to her daughter, we would say that she is a mother. So likewise, a dhamma would be called future, would be called a future dhamma relative to dhammas in the present time or dhammas of the past. And a dhamma would be called present relative to the future or the past dhammas. And a dhamma is called past relative to the present or future dhammas. So it's based on this kind of relativity to which precedes and which follows. Well, that's the view, that's the explanation from Buddhadeva. Of course, there is one thing in common for all of them. They all admit the real entities of factors over past, present, and future. And of these four, Vasumitra's explanation is regarded by Vasubandhu as relatively good, though still subject to Sautantika's criticism. Well, why Vasubandhu thought that the explanation of Vasumitra is relatively good? Because first, the explanation by Dhammatrata is very similar to that of the Samkhya heretics, who believe in a permanent nature, while only the outer images or the outer manifestations change or shift. So it's pretty close to a theory of outsiders. And Kushaka's explanation might lead to a disorder of 3 times that are mixed in an inappropriate manner, because his explanation, Kushaka's explanation, said a dhamma is conjoined with the characteristic of future, but not severed from that of the other two. In other words, with this explanation, the 3 times could be mixed, and they are mixed. So it's there's kind of there is a kind of disorder of the 3 times. A very inappropriate explanation according to Vasubandhu. And the explanation by Buddhadeva who claims the difference in temporal relativity, it has a similar problem. So it also may lead to such a disorder. The past, the future, and present. You don't then with such an explanation, you don't really. How can you decide if a dhamma is past, present, or future? It's all relative, right? There is no way to decide or judge. So there is a disorder inside this theory as well. That's why, relatively, Vasubandhu thinks that Vasumitra's explanation is okay, but it's not flawless. Still, it got a lot of criticism from Sautantika. For example, the Sautantika scholars may ask Vasumitra if they meet one day. So they would ask, first, why does a dhamma not always exercise its activity? So what obstructs the activity of a dhamma to exercise if the dhamma always exists? If the dhamma existed in the past, in the present, in the future, why not the activity? Why does the dhamma? Why does not the dhamma have a all the time working or all the time exercising activity? So this is a question quite difficult to answer. And then the second question or the second argument is that if the Sautantika, for example, can ask Vasumitra, is this activity the nature of the Dhamma itself? Is it one thing, just different names, or is the activity actually something else other than the Dhamma itself? Well, both would have problems. If you say that activity is Dhamma itself, they don't differ from each other. Just have a different name from different perspectives. You just call it activity. You just call it Dhamma. If they're the same, then the future or past Dhamma should not exist, because the future activity has not arisen yet. It has not presented. It has not exercised its activity because it's not yet arising. It's in the future. So, and also the past activity is gone. The past activity has been exercised. So if the activity of the past or future does not exist, then the Dhamma of the past and the future should not exist as well, because activity and Dhamma, they are the same thing. If you say that activity is not the nature of the Dhamma, is other than the Dhamma itself, they're not the same thing, but that also has a big problem. It means that the activity or the Dhamma, they are disconnected. They have nothing to do with each other. They're disconnected, so one of them could be permanent, or both could be permanent. And of course, that is directly contradictory to Buddhist point of view. We do not believe such a permanent nature of any conditioned factor. So then Vasumita's explanation will also have a big problem. In this case, what is the Sautantika's definition of view on this three-time factors? What is their difference in their definition of past and future? According to Sautantika's scholars, the past is that which existed previously but does not exist anymore. And the future is that which, given its causes, will exist but has not existed yet. So it is in this sense that we say that the past and future exist, but they do not exist as real entities as the present dhammas do. In other words, Sautantika only admits a real existence of present dhamma, not the past, not the future. And the present dhamma, they exist, but they exist only one moment. They're momentary. And we also know that Vasubandhu inclined to support this view of Sautantika, as in his commentary, which is Abhidhamma Kusha Bhasya. He said that, as I quote, he said, acknowledging real entities of factors over three times, over the past, future, and present, while also acknowledging their impermanence. This kind of theory I have never heard of. That's Vasubandhu's comment in this topic, on this topic. Now we have a good understanding of Sabstivada's view on all-time existence. We also know what Sautantika scholar and Vasubandhu thought about it. Next, let's take a look on the causes for contaminants to arise. This is also very important for us to know, especially if you do practice Buddhism. This is one of the fundamental things. One of the really important things is try to get rid of or try to alleviate our defilements. So it is very important and insightful to understand how these contaminants arise. Do they have an order? Let's take a look. For instance, the order of arising, we can give an example. If one is confused with the noble truth, we say that he or she has this ignorance, and it starts with ignorance. With such an ignorance, he will have doubt of like the truth of suffering. Does the truth of suffering exist or not? This kind of doubt will arise, and then with this doubt developing through time, it gets stronger and stronger. Then one day it becomes false views, due to maybe false teaching or his own false reflection. And then he will confirm to himself that, okay, it doesn't exist, this is not suffering, and there's no so-called effect of suffering, and there's no origin or no cause of the suffering whatsoever. But that is a false view. Then he might develop this view of self, like taking the five aggregates as self. He would say or think that there's no such a thing, there's no whatever, I'm just going to enjoy my life. Next, he might develop this view of the extremes with an idea of either eternal or annihilated self. For instance, if he thinks that I will exist forever, and that would also give rise to esteeming of morality and ascetic practices, because he might want to purify himself, as he's permanent. He exists forever. So he might think that I will purify myself by some morality or by ascetic practices whatsoever, in order to be reborn as a deva, so I can have superior enjoyments in my next life. I exist all the time, right? So in my next life, I can have more enjoyments, maybe as a deva, so I can cultivate on morality and maybe some some ascetic practices, as long as it helps. And next, this esteeming of views may arise. It's views on which is inferior and superior. For instance, he might think, I must be right. I must be right about my understanding on these things. And he will stick to it. He will stick to his own views. That is the esteeming of views. And next, greed and pride will arise. Like he will be attached to his own view, and that will be followed by pride. For instance, he's so convinced about his own views, and he will think about others like they are idiots, and I am better than others. So this comes with greed and pride. And in the end, hostility may also arise, because he will become totally unacceptable to the views of others. If someone comes to him and try to persuade him and say something like, maybe there is something not so reasonable about your views, he might get upset, he might get angry, and he might say something like, who do you think you are to persuade me? I think your understanding is nonsense, so stay away from me. So he might have also given rise to this hostility to other people. So this is just an example, and it is important to know that there is no fixed order for contaminants to arise. It could be many possibilities and many combinations or different orders. All make sense. In the commentary by Sanghabhadra, he actually gave another example, which I also would like to share. It can start from a view of a self. He believes that, okay, there is me, these things are mine, and then after that, the view of the extremes could happen. Like I take myself as permanent or as annihilated. For instance, if he takes the way of annihilation or negation, the false view occurs. The false view would arise. So then take this false view as superior, that is the esteeming of views. And then if take this extreme of permanence, one day in a later time, he takes the extreme of permanence instead, and wants this me to gain more joy and stay away from suffering, that I should practice some outsiders practices like the Mahasvara school and so on to be liberated, or that is the esteeming of morality and ascetic practices once he starts to do it. And then, of course, he might not be very sure and no one can help him regarding the difference in various schools, various theories. So he might have doubt. He doesn't know really which one is better, a better theory. And then which is authentic and which is superior and which is not and so on. Then afterwards he might choose one as the superior and got attached to that one. And that could be greed. The greed might arise, and after that he take it as a personal achievement and rely on it. Pride would arise, and then he would also be hostile. The hostility would arise, so he would be hostile to other views and people having different views. And if he's unable to or tried to discern or judge from the theories. If we think that, okay, this is too much, this is beyond my capability, I just give up. I don't want to think anymore about it. I just, whatever. If he thinks in that way, you think, I just stop reflection. I shouldn't learn more. I just stop observation or reflection. Then he will rest in ignorance. So this could be another order of arising of these contaminants. Of course, if you are interested, you can start reflecting on an order of arising of these contaminants yourself. It could be interesting. And also next we can continue with this because it is important to know the real causes for us to have these contaminants coming all the time, to have these contaminants annoying us all the time. So what are behind the arising of contaminants? There are three factors. First one, we have defilements that are not abandoned yet. The Savastivadin scholars may call it that we have the possession of defilements, and and the Sautrantika scholars may say that we still have the seeds of defilements. They're not destroyed. The seeds are there, meaning they can they can have fruits anytime. So that's the seeds. All of us, as long as we have not abandoned all defilements, we have the seeds. And then the presence of the object. For instance, the visible forms, a color, a shape, a beautiful person as a cognitive object condition. That is another factor to cause contaminants to rise. And then the last important factor to arise contaminants is incorrect attention, or you can also call it the preparation for contaminants to arise. And we know that attention is one of the generally permeating mental factor. So it can associate with mistaken views, like taking unclean or as clean. In that way, and in this case, if we see a beautiful person and we have this incorrect attention, which associate with the mistaken views of that, then this fundamental contaminant, greed, may give rise, would be able to give to arise. So this is an explanation on why how our contaminants arise. It needs these three factors to co-work. And on the contrary, if we say, then what would be the case for noble beings? So we talk about ordinary beings. We have a lot of defilements. But what would happen for noble beings, especially for those detached from a stage? Well, for noble being, they might still be attached actually to for instance this realm of desire. They might still be attached, meaning they might still have the remaining defilements. The seeds of these contaminants are still there, and they may also face they may also have the objects. The objects are still in presence. They cannot get rid of all of them. They don't live in void. They don't live in a space or isolated, right? So they still have to face the objects of varieties, and but the difference, very much unlike the ordinary beings, and due to the long-term practices and the power of their pure disciplines, the last factor that causes contaminants to rise, which is the incorrect attention, will not arise upon the object. So that's the big difference between the noble beings and us, and the ordinary beings. So therefore, for them, a severe defilement, for instance, greed or hostility towards an object, will not arise. So once we have learned this, what kind of insight can we get from this discussion? Well, I would say that for practitioners and also ordinary beings in this realm of desire, our defilements are there. We haven't abandoned our seeds, and this abandonment of defilements do not happen like overnight. It really takes time. They're not to be abandoned soon or immediately. So they're like hidden bombs. So we have these defilements as hidden bombs, and perhaps more important and temporarily, one should avoid the contact with objects that may assist or facilitate the arising of defilements. For instance, if we have very strong sexual desire, maybe we should just stay away from the beauties. Or if we have strong hostility, maybe we should just try to stay away, to stay away from our enemies. So it becomes relatively easier for our mind to focus on the good factors, the good dhammas. And with such a focus on the good dhammas, and with the power from hearing, from discernment, from hearing, reflection and cultivation and so on, we can practice more and more on the correct intentions. So we become more and more capable to counteract the incorrect ones, so they can gradually lose the power, and the defilements are then not able to easily follow, they will arise or get stronger. In other words, we suppress our defilements with mundane methods, mundane cognitions, temporarily, and eventually we will abandon the defilements with the help of pure cognitions. For instance, when we switch, when we progress, and when we become a noble being, then we have the real power to abandon these defilements once and forever. So these are some insights we can learn from this discussion about the causes for contaminants to arise. Next, we will continue to discuss on the 5 low and 5 higher fetters, and then we will also talk about subsidiary defilements.